Hi. Good afternoon. Welcome to Webinar 4 of our 5-part free webinar series in celebration of the 17th National ADHD Awareness Week. This webinar is brought to you by the ADHD Society of the Philippines, the National Council on Disability Affairs, the Department of Education, and Miriam College's College of Education in partnership with Lenovo Philippines, Smart Communications, and Colony Design. I'm Fiel John Maria. I'm an adult diagnosed with combined type ADHD, and joining us this afternoon is Dr. Carlo Banaag. He's a consultant currently at the Medical City Department of Psychiatry, as well as the Kidney Center. He graduated from the University of the Philippines and did his medical residency in the same university. Okay. And right now, he is an international fellow of the American Psychiatric Association as of 2015, and of the Philippine Psychiatric Association as of 2004. Okay? So he was a speaker for multiple organizations, including the National Council for Disability Affairs and other organizations. Okay, guys, I would have to be the only person in history who's happy to introduce his own psychiatrist in front of the public. Without further ado, let's have a conversation with Dr. Carlo Eugenio Banaag. Take it, Doc Carlo.
Hey, hi guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm just gonna share my screen. This is my first slide, which I hope brings smiles to people's faces.
Yep.
Let's see. Is it changing? Not changing? Teka lang.
Oh.
Okay lang. Let me share a different screen, and hopefully this works. Ayan. Okay. So it is my honor to be invited by the ADHD Society of the Philippines to talk about checking the mental health of persons with ADHD. So I am an adult psychiatrist with ADHD. I have the inattentive type. Sometimes naiingit ako sa mga hyperactive people. This webinar will deal primarily with adult ADHD. Okay, so let's get right to it. So these are our objectives. We will discuss ADHD and mental health. I'll talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on mental health in the general population. We will discuss issues faced by adults with ADHD during the pandemic. I will give a mini lecture on depression and anxiety as medical conditions and how to help determine if someone needs professional help. And then finally, we will discuss ways to optimize mental health naturally. Okay. So, comorbidity is the medical term for two or more disorders occurring at the same time. As you may have heard in previous lectures, it's more the rule than the exception for people with ADHD to have something else going on. As many as 80% of people with ADHD have at least one other coexisting psychiatric disorder. But for this lecture, we'll focus on depression and anxiety, okay, for two reasons. Both depression and anxiety are among the top 10 medical causes of work disability worldwide. Depression is actually number 1, anxiety is number 7. And secondly, both of these conditions have become a huge concern in COVID times. I'll describe this later in greater depth. But even in pre-COVID times, adults with ADHD have always been at much higher risk of developing depression or anxiety in their lifetime than the general population. So why does this happen? Well, a big environmental risk factor for developing depression or anxiety is chronic stress, which tends to be higher in people going through life with ADHD. I will explain chronic stress and its effect on the brain later on. I have some nice visuals for you. People with ADHD are generally under greater stress than neurotypicals. Things that a lot of people take for granted can feel like a struggle if you have ADHD. Things like giving oneself enough time to complete a task, remembering things at the time that you need to remember them, constantly having to make lists and set reminders because you can't rely on your brain to do these things automatically for you. So, like, I call my phone my peripheral brain. I've learned to assume that I'll forget things, and I've set backup systems in place to hopefully minimize the fallout. So, to a certain extent, we people with ADHD rely on anxiety to keep us on top of things. Many people with ADHD are in a constant state of low grade anxiety to help keep them functioning like a regular person. But it can be tiring to have to be always on guard. And coping strategies, although they help lessen problems from ADHD, they're not really foolproof. You know, you can still trip up. So let's talk a little bit about mental health in the time of COVID. Compared to last year, our stress levels have gone up considerably compared to last year. There's so much uncertainty, and uncertainty is really what causes the stress. Everywhere you look, it seems like there is more bad news. So this is just an example from a single week back in August. There was, in August 24th, there was the first confirmed case of true COVID reinfection in Hong Kong. 2 days later, there were true reinfection cases reported in the Netherlands and Belgium. Just this week, there was a confirmed reinfection case in the USA. And just this morning, a doctor friend of mine, who was a neurologist, had a confirmed reinfection case. Why is this a problem? Because this means even if we have a vaccine, we may have to learn to live with COVID. It looks like it's not the kind of thing where once you get infected, you're safe. This is also from the same week. The CDC reported that 41% of over 5,400 respondents had depression, anxiety, increased substance use, and suicidal ideation. Fully 11% of respondents had seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days. And earlier in August, a study in the UK showed that out of over 800 people interviewed, 37.5% met clinical metrics for anxiety and depression. This is like twice to 3 times what it was in pre-pandemic times. Now remember, people with ADHD are already at higher risk for depression and anxiety. And thirdly, in our own country, this is the data as of 2 days ago. We're in the top 20 now in terms of coronavirus cases. Now, this isn't a formal study, but my dad, Cornelio Banag, who talked this morning, I wasn't able to listen in because I forgot. He gave a talk a while back to about 1,800 doctors, mostly OB-GYNs and pediatricians. And during this informal survey conducted during the webinar, 95% of the attendees admitted to feeling depressed and 84% were anxious. These are all doctors. Okay, so this isn't that new, actually. I think it might have been from 2 weeks ago. But remember when the world watched in horror at what was happening in Italy? Currently, the Philippines is number 19 worldwide in terms of number of COVID cases. Okay, so what has been the mental health impact of the pandemic? This is for the general population. This is from the previously mentioned CDC report last August. Out of 5,412 adults surveyed, 40.9 reported an adverse mental health condition. 30.9 had anxiety or depression. 26.3% had some kind of trauma disorder related to the pandemic. 13.3% had increased substance use. 10.7% had serious suicidal thoughts within the past month. Now, keep in mind, this is data from phase one. The data collection was from April to July of this year. Phase two will be completed by October 26th. I mean, things have not gotten much better since July, right? Okay, this is from an article in The Guardian, which came out last July. And I'm quoting, isolation, fear, and grief are all taking their toll. We are facing a mental health crisis. In a large survey of over 16,000 people from the general population, 59% reported that their mental health got worse during the lockdown. And in a smaller study of people already dealing with mental illness, 78% reported a deterioration in their mental health. So this was sourced from the World Economic Forum last August 2020. It shows the share of adults in various countries who experienced stress, anxiety, or sadness that was difficult to cope with. Sorry. Hang on, I got a little lost. That was difficult to cope with alone during the pandemic. Note that all of these are developed countries with presumably better community mental health resources. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about adults with ADHD specifically. How has the pandemic affected them? Well, we've had to deal with the loss of routine, isolation, boredom, the inability to acquire medications. Most doctors I know had to shutter their clinics for several months. Many still have not resumed face-to-face consults. Regarding loss of routine, that's been a big problem for ADHD people. As mentioned previously, we rely heavily on routine so that our ADHD does not trip us up. So these are the issues in greater depth. Increased distractions. There's a reason why, back in normal times, many people with ADHD could only be productive outside of the home. There are just too many distractions at home. And being in lockdown meant many people with ADHD found it harder to make the mental shift necessary to go into work mode. More conflict at home. One of the core symptoms of ADHD, even if it's not included in the official criteria, is emotional dysregulation. So this is difficulty regulating mood, which can present like volume control problems. The mood can be overly intense or out of proportion to the situation. Now, this is from Germany. The German COVID-19 survey on mental health, which came out last May, reported that out of 3,500 people surveyed, 50.9% reported being more easily irritated, 29% reported experiencing more anger and aggression, and of these, 65% reported directing their anger and aggression at others. Now, this is for the general population. Imagine how it must be for ADHD folks. More dependence on technological devices. So we develop more dependence because of the restrictions of quarantine. And while initially it seemed nice, we had time to catch up on Netflix, even downloads, but several months of increased reliance on our gadgets comes with its own set of issues. Okay, so poor hand hygiene. This can be a problem for people with ADHD. There can be several reasons. Sometimes we just forget. Sometimes we're not thinking about the consequences. But this can cause greater conflict, especially if your dynamic at home is that the non-ADHD partner is like your parent. Because people with ADHD get upset or they get defensive. They have a tendency to say, "Oh, you're not my boss. Why are you telling me to do this? I'm an adult. Just I know what I'm doing." So that has the potential for causing greater conflict. Heightened emotions. This is, like I mentioned a while ago, a big problem with ADHD. In the first place, But during the pandemic and especially during quarantine, it became even a bigger problem, like even for like neurotypical people. You know the saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder? Well, the opposite is actually also kind of true. If you're exposed to the same people every single day from the moment you wake up to the moment you go back to sleep, the things that used to seem quirky and endearing can start to get a little bit annoying. And stress, of course, we're all dealing with stress, financial, our concerns about health. Nobody really knows what's going on. So a lot of people have lost their jobs and income. Uh, there's certainly a lot more stress nowadays than there was in last year. Now, this is a typical roadmap seen for people with ADHD during the quarantine. Sleep disruption. So the German COVID-19 survey on mental health that I mentioned earlier noted that 45% of 3,500 people surveyed reported worsening sleep. But worsening sleep leads to worse control over ADHD symptoms. Uh, Anybody, ADHD or not, will have problems cognitively if they're not getting the right sleep. Okay, it turns out we are not actually naturally nocturnal. There have been studies in the past showing that graveyard shift workers have a lot more health problems than people who have like normal schedules. There are certain growth hormones, fat burning enzymes, appetite regulating hormones that are only released when you sleep at night. They're not released when you sleep during the day. So this is a problem. In fact, it's been called an it's been shown that there's an increased risk for cancer if you have a graveyard shift schedule. And for a lot of people, this has happened during the quarantine. We're awake at night and asleep during the day. We're spending more hours asleep during the day than we are at night, partly because wala kang kaagaw sa Wi-Fi at night. Um, but both of these things, combined with the stress, can lead to more anxiety and depression. So these are COVID stressors relevant to ADHD. I got this from a webinar called Coping with Anxiety and Adult ADHD in the COVID-19 world. Uh, I would highly suggest you check it out. It's free to watch. Um, so it's a very useful resource, this website, for people or family members of people with ADHD. Okay, so with COVID, all of a sudden, our schedules, habits, and coping strategies got overturned. Parents had to try to do double duty as tutors for their kids. You know, I've heard parents complain to me now, why am I paying tuition? It's like I'm the one doing all the teaching. There are increased remote work stresses, including distractions and difficulty shifting gears at home. There's competition for space, Wi-Fi, tech needs. Some people I know have to take turns using a laptop. This is a very difficult situation for a person with ADHD. With ADHD, you know, there's a saying, for a lot of ADHD people, they understand only two units of time, right now and never. So if it's not going to happen right now, it might as well never happen. And if you have to wait your turn, there's a good chance you might not end up doing the thing that you were planning to do when it's your turn now. So all of this heightens family conflicts. Parents with ADHD and or kids with ADHD can have problems reacting to stress, the changes in routines, and this increases the likelihood of short tempers and poorly handled interactions. For those living alone, isolation can be a problem. It can be hard finding ways to pass the time or amuse yourself with all of the restrictions in place. For those living with others, there are limited social buffers. Spending every single day with the same person can be stressful to that. It can be much harder to find the needed alone time to recharge. There are fewer non-screen activities available to us, which for many introverts like myself initially felt like heaven. But after about 8 months, it starts to feel less fun. Now, loss of scaffolding is a big one. Routines like having to get up for school or work, taking a bath at a regular time, these all help set the tone for the day and get us moving. Without it, people with ADHD often lack the necessary impulsion or ability to move to task to get anything done. So let's face it, many days during this quarantine, the only executive decision you had to make was what time you were going to change from your nighttime pajamas to your daytime pajamas. And for many with ADHD, this has led to many hours of lying in bed with ceaseless, unfocused thoughts, only to realize the day is almost over and they got nothing done again. Jobs, decrease in income, a lot of people, not just ADHD people, have had to deal with that. Health issues, a lot of people have difficulty managing their medical conditions well following the loss of routine. Uh, it's harder to remember to take your meds. Pandemic. We've had to deal with loss, grief, boredom, and problems with access to care and meds. People with ADHD have had to develop new coping skills for the new normal, learning through trial and error what works and what doesn't. So this is actually when I get a little anxious when I travel. I have to be extra careful because my routines are gone. I found I'm much more likely to lose stuff. The place where I normally put my keys is no longer there. So I am anxious actually when I travel, especially when I'm like alone. I've gotten on the wrong plane. That's how bad it is for me. I've gotten on the wrong plane. I blame them because they should not let people like me in unless I have the right boarding pass. But the attendant put my boarding pass through. This was in Washington, D.C. And there was a boop or a beep, and then she said, "Go ahead." So I went in. I was sitting in my seat, and then this young guy came over and said, "I think you're in my seat." So I looked at his boarding pass, and I told him, "Sorry, no, this is actually my seat." And I showed him my boarding pass. And the stewardess comes, and she looks at our boarding passes, and she looked at me and said, "If you run, you might make it." So I ran, and I made it, but that's a big reason why I am actually very anxious when traveling alone. I like to travel with people, so I just have to keep my eyes on the people in front of me. Anyway, all of this worsens the uncertainty we're dealing with. Everyone, from top government officials to school and hospital administrators to doctors, athletes, company employees, everybody is playing it by ear. Nobody alive has a blueprint on how to best deal with what we're facing. So if it's any consolation, nobody knows what to reasonably expect from you either. Those in charge are going to rely on your feedback as to what works and what doesn't. Okay, so what do we do when faced with uncertainty? Remember Crumbs. This is from a lecture I did a couple of months ago. Basically, remember Crumbs. C stands for connections. Reach out to friends and family for support. R stands for routine. Create a daily schedule with realistic goals and work-life balance. So be able to mentally shift into and away from work. I literally pretend I'm going to work. Like my desk is a few feet away from my bed, but I take a bath. I change my clothes. I comb my hair. I carry my bag with me. This lady I know actually puts on shoes and like jewelry and to get into that work mode and set a schedule for when it's time to stop working. In between, try not to fall back into like the I'm at home mode. U stands for understanding. Realize how uncertainty and disruptions to your life increase stress. M is mindfulness. Stay in the present moment. Don't try to predict the far future. Only focus on what you can control. B stands for boundaries. Set boundaries and limitations to manage the constant stream of information and social media. So many times I found myself just going from bad news to bad news. The term for that apparently is doom scrolling. So don't do that. Set a time limit. Like I'm going to doom scroll for 30 minutes and then I'm going to do something else because this is going to drive me nuts if I do this the whole day. And S stands for self-care. Make a conscious effort to include activities that promote health, sleep, exercise, and eating well. Now, what do you do if you're doing the best that you can, but you still feel like you're not well, like there's something wrong? Or what if you suspect that you or someone you know is experiencing a clinical depression or anxiety disorder? What do we do then? So to answer that, I'll first help clarify how depression and anxiety in the medical sense are different from normal sadness and worry. And to explain that, I'll talk about the brain as an organ for a bit. Your brain is the most important organ, but that's according to the brain. So maybe it's a little bit biased. But really, the brain is a very complex organ. It has a lot of functions it has to perform, apart from the executive functions that we're aware of as part of the ADHD core symptoms. It also regulates sleep, appetite, mood, the anxiety system, and it actually also helps regulate your stress levels. And the brain needs to be healthy to be able to perform these functions well. So does this make sense so far? Now we have about 86 billion brain cells or neurons, and each brain cell is connected to about 1,000 other brain cells. The stronger and more numerous the connections between the brain cells, the better the transmission of signals from neuron to neuron, and the better can the brain perform its functions. So according to Nobel laureate Eric Kandel, the mind is a series of functions carried out by the brain. You need to have a healthy brain to have a healthy mind. Now, what do these connections that I was talking about look like? These connections between brain cells. On the left side of the screen, you see a representation of a single brain cell or a neuron. The magnified area shows protrusions called dendritic spines. Now, these dendritic spines are the points of connection between that neuron and thousands of other neurons. These dendritic spines are highly dynamic. They're not like just in place, meaning they are constantly changing in size and number. The more dense and robust they are, the better the communications between brain cells, and therefore the healthier the brain is in general. Now, there's a growth hormone in the brain called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which acts as fertilizer or miracle grow for these dendritic spines. So ignore the other things like Krebs, monoamines, glutamate. Just focus on BDNF. The higher your BDNF levels, the more numerous our dendritic spines become, and they actually get bigger. When BDNF is low, the opposite happens. So that's what it looks like when BDNF is low. The dendritic spines become less dense. The connections are unhealthy. Now, most will experience this like burnout symptoms. That's brain fog and decreased stress tolerance, meaning you feel more stressed over smaller things, which can look like irritability. So why does BDNF go down? A very common environmental factor is chronic stress. Okay. So this is what stress does to the body. When we're chronically stressed, and it doesn't matter where the stress is coming from, it can be from relationship problems, work problems, poor sleep, usually a combination of different factors. There's a hormone called cortisol, which is called the stress hormone, that is continuously released into the bloodstream. Cortisol causes a release of inflammatory substances that cause damage to the whole body. For some, there's an increase in acid secretion in the stomach, which can lead to hyperacidity, stress ulcers, stress gastritis. For others, the immune system gets impaired, leading to rashes, pimples, hair loss, frequent infections. The regulation of blood pressure becomes impaired, increasing the risk of hypertension, heart attacks, and stroke. The regulation of blood sugar can also become impaired, which can worsen diabetic control. Muscle tension increases and it can be sustained, leading to chronic back pains, tension headaches, and migraines. Problems with sexual functions often happen. Dentists have reported an increase in bruxism or tooth grinding, an increase in teeth fractures and TMJ disorders during this pandemic. In other words, the whole body can be affected when our cortisol levels are high. And as it turns out, the organ that we call the brain is actually a part of the body. Who would have thought? It can also be affected by stress. And again, having a healthy mind depends on having a healthy brain. So again, that's what happens. So when the brain is unhealthy, the connections between neurons are unhealthy, and this unsurprisingly affects how the mind functions. Now, if this process isn't reversed, the brain continues to become unhealthier and it goes beyond just burnout. So actually, that's what vacations are for. When you're feeling burnt out, you're supposed to take a break, refresh yourself, recharge. This is also thought to be the reason why when the internet age came in, our rates of stress disorders, mental health problems also increased. I think it's partly because we don't really get real breaks. It's like wherever you are, you're expected to be connected. So you're expected to check your emails, you're expected to be productive. Unlike before, if you went to the beach, voila, there was no Wi-Fi, no internet, you're done, you're free. And there's no expectations for you to be constantly connected. But nowadays, it's very different. But anyway, if you're not able to get yourself out of that burnout stage by finding ways to reduce your stress or increase BDNF, then the brain becomes more unhealthy and other functions become compromised, including its ability to regulate sleep, leading to insomnia, appetite, causing changes in weight, mood, and the anxiety system. And even the brain's ability to regulate our stress response becomes impaired, meaning even when the stress is gone, the body is still producing too much cortisol. So at that point, it moves beyond just burnout symptoms and you become at risk for having either depression, anxiety, or both in a medical sense. So this is what clinical depression or anxiety look like. We often use the words "nade-depress ako" or "oh, I'm so anxious." We throw that out, and the meaning of these words in the medical sense is actually very different from just being sad or worried. Depression is different from just being sad. In normal sadness, even in extreme form like grief, we feel sad when we're thinking about something saddening. And when we stop thinking about it, we feel okay. We're not typically impaired. So you can go to a wake and you can feel horribly sad, but you can usually go to work the next day. It's not hard to get through the day. A clinical depression is very different. It's pervasive, meaning it's there from the moment you wake up. Most of the day it's there, more days than not. And it's persistent, lasting at least 2 weeks. And it's not even the sad mood that's the problem. It feels more like you're flattened. Everyday things like getting out of bed, taking a bath, changing clothes can feel like it takes an enormous effort. Even just rolling over in bed to get to your ringing phone can feel like it takes a superhuman effort. Now, this is the reason why the WHO ranks depression as the #1 cause of poor health and work disability worldwide. With anxiety, it's normal to feel anxious if we're faced with danger. When we are out of danger, the anxiety subsides. So we have an anxiety system that is hardwired into our brain, and its purpose is to keep us safe. It activates when there is a need to either fight or run away from danger. But when we are talking about an anxiety disorder in the medical sense, it's as if that fire alarm is malfunctioning. It can be chronically activated, leading to excessive worrying. It feels like the whole day you have no peace of mind. It's like the whole day your brain is looking for things in the environment to explain why you feel so anxious. Or it can be like the fire alarm just goes off suddenly and inappropriately, like in a panic attack, wherein the body is reacting as if there's extreme danger, even when there is none. Now, anxiety disorders are number 7 among the top 10 causes of work disability worldwide. I'll show you some slides, just maybe 4 slides, on functional imaging scans of the brain for depression and anxiety. Okay, so this is a PET scan. A PET scan measures vital functions such as blood flow, oxygen use, and blood sugar. Now, this slide compares the non-depressed and the depressed brain, and you can see a clear difference. This is another PET scan of the depressed brain. So clearly, so if you look at it, it looks like maybe 20% of the brain is functioning. So clearly, people with depression are suffering from a true medical condition. Telling somebody with depression to just choose happiness is like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. Now, this is a SPECT scan of the normal brain versus the brain suffering from an anxiety disorder. It demonstrates that an anxiety disorder is a biological medical disorder that affects how we think and behave. Telling someone with an anxiety disorder to just calm down is like telling somebody having an asthma attack to just breathe. And finally, here's another PET scan showing the difference between the normal brain on the left and the brain with panic disorder, one of the common types of anxiety disorders. Now, telling someone to have a panic attack to stop being dramatic is like telling somebody having a seizure to just snap out of it. Now, how do I know if I or someone I know needs professional help? Well, there are many screening tools that are designed to help healthcare workers determine if someone may need to see a mental health professional. One of the easiest and most commonly used is a screening tool called the Hospital Anxiety and Depression Scale. It's often used in outpatient clinics. It's just 14 questions, 7 depression questions, and 7 anxiety questions. It can be filled out while waiting for your turn to see the doctor. I thought maybe we could try it right now, if you would like. All you need is a piece of paper and a pencil or pen. I'll give you some time to get this in case you want to try it out. And also I'll drink some water. So if you have a paper in front of you, just make 2 columns, the D column and the A column. Okay, write down a big letter D for depressive symptoms and a big letter A for anxiety symptoms on the piece of paper. I'll flash the questions in the next 2 slides. Again, there are just 7 questions each for depression and anxiety. You'll be writing down answers on a scale from 0 to 3 on the corresponding half of the page. Again, D for the depression symptoms and A for the anxiety symptoms. And then we will add them up later to get your score. Okay, so let's start. So tick the box beside the reply that is closest to how you've been feeling in the past week. Don't take too long over your replies. Your immediate reply is best. So again, since you don't likely have a copy of this questionnaire near you, let's just write it down on the paper. So the first one, let's start here at the upper left, is the statement is, I feel tense or wound up. Would you say, write down 3 in the A column if you think it's most of the time. Write down a 2 if it's a lot of the time. 1 if it is from time to time, occasionally, and 0 if not at all. So let's move over here to the right side. Now this is a D question. Or a D statement. I feel as if I am slowed down. Would you say 3, nearly all the time, 2, very often, 1 if it's just sometimes, and 0 if it's not at all? Okay, so we move down. This is a D question again. So write down on the D column. I still enjoy the things I used to enjoy. Write down 0 if it's definitely as much, 1 if it's not quite so much, 2 if it's only a little, and 3 if it's hardly at all. Okay, now we move to the right. This goes on the A column, anxiety column. I get a sort of frightened feeling like butterflies in the stomach. Write down 0 if not at all, 1 if it's occasionally, 2 if it's quite often, and 3 if it's very often. And on the lower third, the last part of this slide, this is again an A question. I get a sort of frightened feeling as if something is about to happen. Write down a 3 if it's very definitely and quite badly, 2 if it's yes but not too badly, 1 if it's a little but it doesn't worry me, and 0 if not at all. And then we go to the right. This goes on the D column for depression. I have lost interest in my appearance. Would you say 3 definitely, 2 if it's I don't take as much care as I should, 1 if it's I may not take quite as much care, and 0 if I take just as much care as ever. Okay, so we're done with the first half. We proceed. Okay. Let's start at the top left again. This goes on the D column. I can laugh and see the funny side of things. Write down 0 if it's as much as I always could, 1 if it's not quite so much now, 2 if it's definitely not so much now, and 3 if it's not at all. Moving to the right, this goes on the A column. I feel restless, as if I have to be on the move. Write down 3 if it's very much indeed, 2 if it's quite a lot, 1 if it's not very much, and 0 if not at all. Okay, we go down. This goes on the A column. Worrying thoughts go through my mind. Would you say a great deal of the time? Write down 3. 2 if it's a lot of the time, 1 if it's from time to time but not too often, and 0 if it's only occasionally. We go to the right. This goes on the D column. I look forward with enjoyment to things. Write down a 0 if it's as much as I ever did, 1 if it's rather less than I used to, 2 if it's definitely less than I used to, and 3 if it's hardly at all. Now we go down again. This goes on the D column again. The statement is, I feel cheerful. Write down 3 if it's not at all, 2 if it's not often, 1 if it's sometimes, and 0 if it's most of the time. Now we move to the right. This goes on the A column. I get sudden feelings of panic. Write down 3 if it's very often indeed, 2 if it's quite often, 1 if it's not very often, and 0 if it's not at all. And the last two. Let's go to the last line here, last row. This goes under the A column. I can sit at ease and feel relaxed. Write down 0 if your answer is definitely, 1 if it's usually, 2 if it's not often, and 3 if it's not at all. Go to the last question or statement. I can enjoy a good book or radio or TV program. Right? This goes on the D column. Write down a 0 if your answer is often, 1 if it's sometimes, 2 if it's not often, and 3 if it's very seldom. Okay, so that's all the questions. Please check to see you've answered all the questions. And let's move to how it's scored. So this is how the scoring is evaluated. Add up all your D answers and the A answers. Okay, so 0 to 7 is normal, 8 to 10 is borderline case, and 11 to 21 is considered like clinical. You should see someone. If you or someone else you know scores an 11 or higher, consider getting professional help. Most psychiatrists are doing online consults now, and it seems to be working. Like, we're lucky as a specialty because we don't have to physically examine a patient. So this is actually doable, this whole work from home thing. Now, what if you don't score 11 or higher, but you have a feeling that you're not your healthiest self? Uh, what can you do? Maybe you feel like you're stuck in a rut, especially during this whole pandemic. Uh, are there natural ways to increase BDNF? Well, you are in luck because there are actually many things you can do to get your brain healthier. There's a lot of articles online on how to increase BDNF. I will share information over the next few slides that I'm borrowing from Dr. John Day. He's a cardiologist who wrote an article called 10 Ways to Boost Brain Function with BDNF. I like his article because, like any good doctor should, his information is evidence-based and he provides links to the evidence. So, natural ways to increase BDNF. Number one is really exercise. Exercise is the fastest way to increase your BDNF levels naturally. As seen from the studies, okay, sorry, I just cut and paste this from his article. Even short bursts of exercise, like high intensity interval training, can dramatically raise BDNF. So what is high intensity interval training? Well, you can download apps. There's something called the 7-minute workout, which is very, very useful. It's like 30 seconds of maximum effort alternating with 30 seconds of rest. And they're just body weight exercises, jumping jacks, sit-ups, push-ups, stuff like that. 7 minutes is something you can do in the shower before you take a shower. Like you don't have to be dressed. You don't need gear to do it. So you can download that app. I highly recommend it. You can do it every day. And it seems like it's that burst of high intensity that is responsible for the benefits of HIIT or HIIT. There's studies showing that 10 minutes of HIIT is equivalent to 45 minutes of moderate exercise, moderate level exercise. So it's a good way to save time. Not that we're lacking time during this pandemic, but for people with ADHD, it may be easier to stick to because it's not boring. I can't imagine doing 45 minutes on a treadmill. I can't do it. But the 7-minute workout or the 10-minute workout, I can do that because you're counting down the seconds, so it's less boring. Number 2, avoid sugar, processed foods, and HFCs. Just as exercise can raise BDNF levels, sugar, processed foods, and high fructose corn syrup all do the exact opposite. So sugar actually causes inflammation in the body. The same inflammation that is bad for the brain, that's bad for the heart, that's bad for everything. The same inflammation that's released when we are under stress. So it's actually, you should look at sugar as the enemy. Don't. I think the recommendation is no more than 6 teaspoonfuls of added sugar in your daily diet. Number 3, intermittent fasting. Interestingly, there's a growing body of data that time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting may also increase BDNF. So what I like about IF is that it's not hard to do. You can eat your usual diet. It's not very restrictive. It's just you stick to a certain time period. So a lot of people do the 8 hours, an 8-hour period where you can eat, followed by 16 hours when you're fasting and not eating. So in this pandemic, it's not that hard to do. You can eat at 10 a.m., so it's like brunch, and then just make sure that your last meal is before 6 p.m. That's 8 hours, and then don't eat until brunch the next day. Drink water, but don't eat. That's already IF, and there's evidence it does increase BDNF. Other ways, mental stimulation. Exercising our brains with mental stimulation also increases BDNF. Like everything else, the old adage, use it or lose it, also applies to the brain. Number 5, eat oily fish. Recent data shows that a diet high in omega-3s can improve BDNF levels and boost brain function. So the way this is supposed to work is, it's not really that omega-3 directly boosts BDNF, but omega-3s have an anti-inflammatory effect. So it reduces the impact of the inflammation on your brain. Number 6, be with family and friends. Close, nurturing relationships have been shown to boost BDNF. These are the relationships that come from real friendships or spending time with family members. Number 7, get some sun. Even something as simple as getting some sun each day can boost BDNF levels. This has actually been a problem during the pandemic. We haven't been getting out because of the quarantine. There have been some studies showing that a lot of people are suffering from low vitamin D levels. So look for opportunities to get out of your home or your office building and feel some of the sun's healing effects each day. Number 8, eat more curry or turmeric, red grapes, and blueberries. So curcumin, which is found in turmeric to a lesser extent in curry, has been shown to increase BDNF, actually increases BDNF, and it can even help prevent Alzheimer's disease. Now, if you're going to take turmeric supplements, I know you can buy them online. They come in like capsules or powder. Make sure that you get it with I forget it. There's a particular. It's mixed with a pepper that you need to take to increase the absorption. Bioperine is the name of the pepper. Okay. Red grapes, resveratrol, which is found primarily in red grapes, has also been shown to boost BDNF levels. Blueberries, the anthocyanin in blueberries have also been shown to raise BDNF. Number 9, do something to reduce stress. So, like with any medical condition, whether we're talking about diabetes or hypertension or gout, the first thing you need to do is reduce the risk factor. So if you have diabetes, you have to reduce your sugar. If you have a mental health condition, if you want to take care of your brain, find ways to reduce your stress. The best way to do it is figure out what is under your control and what is not. If you're stressing out over something that is not actually under your control, meaning whether you stress out over it or not, it doesn't affect the outcome. It's like you're getting wasted stress. It's like a diabetic who isn't even hungry deciding to have a cake. So sayang lang. Your brain took the hit and there was no purpose to it. So only focus on the things that you can control. This also actually includes things like hobbies that you can do each day to unwind mentally. This is where yoga comes in, meditation, mindfulness. An hour spent meditating or doing mindfulness is an hour that you are giving your brain a break from constant worry or stress. And finally, get at least 7 hours of sleep. I would actually say 8 hours. I would say give yourself a chance to get 8 hours of sleep. You may not need it, but in case you do need it, you will have a chance to get it. Sleep is critical for health. There are studies now, like Time Magazine just earlier this year, they showed that apparently when you're sleeping, that's the time that your brain cleanses a lot of the metabolic byproducts that we build up during the day. And so if you're sleep deprived, those byproducts build up, and it's been shown to be a risk factor for Alzheimer's. When we're not getting the sleep we need, even if it's because of something we enjoy, like Netflixing, binge watching Cobra Kai or The Last Kingdom, I get that it's hard to stop watching, and YouTube is actually very unhelpful because every video you finish, there's another suggestion like, oh, you like that? Well, what about this one? This is good too. The problem is our cortisol levels actually increase as much as 37% just from not getting the sleep that we need. Okay. So yeah, take care of that. There's a whole bunch of articles about how our use of gadgets has made sleep a problem. The blue frequency of light, the blue in the light spectrum, actually hampers the release of melatonin. So the way this works, and again, this is a little mini lecture, and I know I'm running a little bit low on time, but just so you guys understand, what naturally happens is when it's time for sunset, the blue wavelength of light disappears. That's why we have like the red, the orange, the pink hues. The blue is gone. That absence of the blue wavelength is the signal for our brain to start ramping up production of melatonin, which is what tells the rest of the brain that it's time to start shutting down for us to feel sleepy. But when we are faced with screens the whole day, and especially at night, the brain gets confused as to whether it's night or day. So some people, naturally humans, instead of doing the healthy thing, they're like, well, I'm wearing blue light filter glasses, or oh, my phone has or my tablet has a blue light filter. The problem is there's such a thing as nalipasan ng antok. So it's like if you fight off the sleep long enough, like within 15 minutes, your melatonin can be resorbed, and then you're left with feeling awake. You're not sleepy anymore. Okay, so have healthy sleep habits. There, Google sleep hygiene. I tell all my patients that you should look at sleep as your best medicine. Google sleep hygiene and make sure you're doing what's healthy for your brain. Like I mentioned a while ago, humans are not naturally nocturnal. So take good care of your brain. Now, to sum up, persons with ADHD are prone to having comorbid conditions. This pandemic has really done a number on the mental health of people worldwide. Chronic stress plays a significant role in causing mental health problems. Depression and anxiety are medical conditions that are treatable. And the more ways we can find to keep our brain healthy, the more of a buffer you have against stress. Okay, so actually that's my last slide. Your brain is precious. Take care of it. It's not going to take care of itself. I think that there might be a question and answer portion, but I wasn't sure. So I made a slide that I made. This is the most fun part of the lecture. Looking for celebrities and memes these are the things that keep me up at night. I'll just play this for you. Okay. These are celebrities with ADHD, famous people with ADHD. I try to stick to people who've actually publicly spoken about their ADHD, except for some obvious people like Walt Disney and Albert Einstein, who weren't alive at the time ADHD was a diagnosis. So while we're watching, if there are any questions, you can write them in and I'll try to answer as best I can. And thanks for listening.
Okay. I just like to invite people to. I just want to invite people to comment in some of their questions. We do have a few here. Yeah, but if you have a question, please. This is now your time to comment it on our feed. Okay, just want to remind everybody. Yeah, grabe, ang dami pala. Actually, some of these celebrities here, I'm not even sure. No. Yeah.
These are people, I double checked. Like I
Yeah.
checked each one. I put in the ones who've publicly spoken about ADHD, about their ADHD. So Dustin
Right.
Hoffman, wow. Emma Watson, I've known for a long time. Not personally, but I know she has ADHD.
Hmm. Okay. So okay. So thank you for the talk, Doc Carlo. This is something that I definitely learned. By the way, both Doc Carlo and I, we constantly handle adults with ADHD. But you know, I do this every day. But I learned a lot from him today. You know, I was laughing and so just like reacting to some of the messages, you know, out of view here. Like, for example, my wife, who also is diagnosed, also one of your patients, right,
Oh,
of an inattentive type ADD. You know, the
that's sad.
same thing happened to her on the plane, actually. Yeah.
Glad to
So
hear.
nagkaroon din siya ng plane for, yeah, you know.
Glad to hear
So,
I'm not the
hello.
only one.
Yeah. So it happened, ano, it happened as well. So we do have a few questions here, no? That perhaps ano ba,
Oh,
discuss na natin ngayon, ano? Yeah. So there's
sure.
so the first question the first question is no. Aside from ano, my first question is you mentioned a lot of natural ways to increase BDNF. No, and of course you're a doctor, you're a psychiatrist, and there are times that you prescribe medication also for mental health issues. Is there such a thing as a medication that increases or has the potential to affect BDNF levels?
Yeah, yeah, good question. And I also looked into that. Surprisingly, these medicines that we call antidepressants, they're not
Mm-hmm.
antidepressants.
Mm,
They're not happy pills. They actually only work if your brain is unhealthy. If your brain is healthy, it doesn't make you feel better. But these antidepressants, these medicines that boost SSR, that boost serotonin, um, they also increase BDNF. And it's thought that that might be a
mm,
big role in how they work.
right. No.
So there's a
So
lot of
I guess what
psychiatric meds that do that.
I see. Okay. So I guess that's also an important thing, no, that if your psychiatrist does recommend to you that you need to take medication depending on your situation and such. Of course, we still live in a context where a lot of people are incredibly apprehensive when it comes to medication, no? Yeah, and
Mm,
such, right? No. Yeah, but we're also happy to see that a doctor such as you would talk about some of the the, some of the natural solutions here, such as yung high intensity interval training and the like, right?
yeah. I
So,
deal with it like if a person has pre-diabetes or pre-hypertension, you try to do the
mm,
natural things first. Reduce
mm,
the risk factor, increase the protective factors by
mm,
increasing BDNF. If you're doing that already and you're still not well, then you should be considering meds.
right, okay. I like how oftentimes, okay. So what I like as well is that a lot of the metaphors that you use, no, you also use some of the other, I would say at this point in time, more familiar physiological conditions so that people would understand. Oh nga naman, ano kunyari, kung may diabetes ako, alangan naman di ako mag-insulin pag ano na. Okay. So we have another question here. All right. Um, what do you advise to do when ADHD already negatively affects work life and relationships? This is a question from Malu right here. Hmm.
Get a good coach like Mr. Fiel Maria.
Yun nga lang, pag graduate ka
Question.
na, di na kita matatanggap.
Ganun ba
As a
yun?
psychologist. Yeah, yeah, I only work with
With
teens,
kids?
young adults,
Oh,
yeah.
I did not
High
know
school, college lang. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the first
Age
thing I
group.
would ask you is, are you in the right line of work? Because actually,
Mm,
ADHD, you can do great. It can be a help for you if you find the
mm,
right line of work. So you have
yeah.
to get into a line of work that is engaging. It's something that you would like to do. It's something that you would do if you didn't have to work, if you won the lottery. Ganon.
Mm,
Um, because when we are naturally engaged in something, then the dopamine is flowing, and so it's easier to stick to what we're doing. Um, ADHD people, not all the time, but often, they tend to do well with the types of work where, number one, like I said, you're actually engaged in it, you like it. Number two, you have a lot of
totally.
autonomy, meaning you have control over your time, over your schedule, because we have a different kind of schedule compared to other people. Like if for most people, if given 10 days, they can do 10% roughly every day. And then they have a reward on the ninth day because they're like, oh, I'm almost done. And this is just a little bit of work. This was very satisfying. ADHD people have trouble working like that. We'll spend the first 8 days, 9 days, starting and stopping, feeling like you're just sitting and getting nothing done. It feels like twice the effort for half the results. And then you spend the last 1 or 2 days doing 90% of the work. So
Mm,
that's a difficult situation if you're working with a team, like with a team of people that rely on your daily output. So that can be hard, it can be stressful. So you may not be in the right line of work. I know this woman who's now middle aged by now. She was having a lot of trouble with ADHD, and that was the first time that she was diagnosed when she talked to me. And when she
right.
learned that ADHD can actually be helpful if you find the right line of work, she got into something that she was very passionate about. So women's rights.
Mm,
She never took meds. She never needed meds because she was very passionate about that. It was engaging to her.
mm,
So you need to find
right.
something like that. I have this. He says he's a talk show host, but since I don't watch TV, I don't know. He says he knows he has ADHD, but he doesn't take meds because it makes him less entertaining.
Mm,
So, ganun eh. You have to look for something out there that suits your ADHD.
right. I totally agree with that as a person as well with ADHD. I found that my dependence on medication is greatly reduced by the nature of the work that I do. So, for example, when I'm talking to many of the coaches who also have ADHD, have autism, and other of these issues, I don't really need to take, methylphenidates and things like that. But when I have to write the reports on them and I have to submit it to the school or the parents or the center, the tendency is I do have to take the medication. So, so I'm less dependent on meds when I'm doing something that I like. So in that sense.
But that's what I
Okay.
like about ADHD. You have the
Yeah.
option of being in your non-ADHD brain, and you can be your glorious ADHD self when you need it. So the
Hmm.
meds can really help.
Okay. Actually, it's interesting that you mentioned middle-aged person that you know, and there's this uh, for and this next question is for seniors, and I'm sending this anonymously for seniors who seem to have the symptoms. Okay, so they're above 60. What can you suggest for them to deal with difficulties during this pandemic by needing to stay home and causing some depression? You know, very pandemic, very timely question for sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I've always felt for a long time that I think seniors might have been the hardest hit by this pandemic. Not just physically, even when they get ill, but younger folks are more comfortable with having an online life. You know,
Right.
we spend a lot of time online. Like for me, it was like a relief not having to physically have to meet people because I think I'm also on. I kind of have some autism spectrum symptoms also.
Right.
But I was thinking that it's a lot harder for seniors because the restrictions were so great because they are a vulnerable population. And I keep wondering, how are they doing it? I'm not sure. I guess figure out things that you enjoy doing that you can do safely given the restrictions of quarantine.
Hmm.
You know,
Right.
like Dr. John Day mentioned, use it or lose it. You have to use your mind. You have to do
Hmm.
something and this is the important thing. There has to be a learning component. So the two things that help increase BDNF in terms of activities are it has to be something you enjoy, and there has to be a learning component. So watching Netflix, it's fun, but it there's no learning component to it. Your brain
Right.
actually has to be exercised for you to get that benefit.
Right. Right. I do have some feedback there. I have a brother with some mental health issues. I have a wife with ADD, and I have a mom na. It's pretty obvious where I got the ADHD from, and I got all of them into aquascaping recently. It's basically just keeping aquariums, but you put plants in them. And
Oh,
it seems that making these aquariums and such has
yeah.
kept them engaged, but in a relaxed, non-stressful manner. Like moving the rocks around and planting the
Mhm,
actual plants
mhm,
and
mhm.
making the aquarium look nice, ganyan. So it can be done because there are delivery services, ganyan, they don't have to get out of the house. And
Right.
interestingly enough, my influence upon them, because I love aquariums, but not necessarily the aquascaping
Right.
part of it. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I never thought they would get into that. Now we have the
That's
same hobby, so
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
So parang yeah, within the limits of the pandemic and having Grab and Lala Move at
Mhm.
your disposal, they are able to practice this. No,
Yeah.
so
You made me think of a psychiatrist that I know who also has ADHD.
okay.
That's what he did this whole pandemic. He got
Aquariums.
hyper focused on aquariums. So
Yeah,
so much goes into it, pala. It's like a
yeah,
science. I thought it was just you
absolutely,
put fish in there, pero hindi. There's a science to it.
absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely. No, yun. So yeah, yeah, apparently it's good therapy. Maybe I can contact him one of these days, and
mm.
we can like
Gardening, better than gardening. Flowers. My
plantito,
dad. That's what my dad
plantita. Yeah,
does. Oh, my
yeah.
dad is
Yep.
a
I've been to
flower
your house.
garden.
It looks great. Like it's so relaxing. Like
Yeah.
you yeah, parang nakakawala talaga ng stress and tension when I'm in the garden of your dad. Yeah.
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 Well, I just want to point out, I didn't mention this kanina, but yung exercise,
Mm.
so there's a study from France. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but
Mm.
so yes, exercise is good, but they found that in terms of BDNF, exercising in nature makes the difference. They had
Makes
two
a
groups of
difference.
people who they had exercise in the city and those in nature. The ones who were exercising in the city, hindi tumaas yung BDNF. The
Mm.
ones that were exercising in nature, it did. So they were thinking maybe the stress of being in the city with the cars and the people and the population density, baka the stress was outweighing the benefits. So there's
Mm.
actually a recommendation now that you should spend at least 2 hours per week in nature
Right. 2 hours per week in nature.
mm.
Yeah.
To prevent depression or to minimize the risk of depression.
Mm-mm. Right. And Actually, no, on that topic, I am moving out of the city, but that's another time for the same
Congratulations.
reasons. Yeah.
That's the
Oh,
right move.
okay. Yeah, it seems to be the case, right? So I have another question here. Okay. So this is from an adult, also sent anonymously. It says here, I have ADHD, and my problem is that I'm in a line of work that I love. So she likes her work. So I want to do everything, and it's become so hard to stop. I feel so stressed now. So what can I do to help manage this?
The thing you can do is learn.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the comedian Jerry Seinfeld.
Mm-hmm.
He has this saying that knowledge, no, pain is knowledge rushing in to fill a gap. When you're in pain, whether it's mentally or physically, that is something that you needed to know. That's something that you can learn from. There's a gap there, uh, which is now filled because of the pain that you're experiencing. So what does that mean? Um, if you got in trouble because you overcommitted to too many things, that pain that should be used as a learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people all the time, there's really no bad uh, things that happen. They're just learning experiences. So as long as you learn from it, then you got something out of it. It's something that you needed to know. So pain is knowledge rushing in to fill a gap. So it's like if you're walking through your house at night and then you bang your knee on the table, that's knowledge that the table was there, and the pain, and that's knowledge rushing in real quick because you hit yourself on your table. So ganun din. I mean, he said it in a funny way, but actually, that's the purpose. If there's something going on in your life and you're not happy or it's causing you discomfort, learn from it. Figure out what it is. How did you get there? How do you lessen the likelihood of that happening? That's been my life with ADHD. Every time something happens where the ADHD trips me up, I learn from it. So I once lost my car in a mall, Shangri-La Mall pa naman, and there were so many levels of parking. I couldn't remember where I parked. I
It's
was thinking,
happened
did
to me
somebody
so
steal
many
it?
times. Yeah.
So since then, I take a picture. Every time I park somewhere, so number one, I tend to park in the same place every time. But
Okay.
but in case I can't, I take a picture of where my car is at. Diba?
Right.
So yun eh. That's using the pain to your benefit. You figure out ways where it won't happen again, and if it does happen again, figure out figure out why did it happen again despite my backup systems. Then eventually, if you keep doing it that way, you find something that works for you.
Hmm. Absolutely. So you kind of have to figure it out, no? So since she already loves, yeah, since she loves, what she already does as her work, there is this idea of understanding how that pain can teach you, yeah, and make you learn new things and new coping mechanisms, no? Which I sort of agree with, no? I will take your pain and, start taking the picture of the parking slot from now on. Okay. That's my lesson. Okay.
Sobrang
So,
helpful.
hmm. So now, so the next question is this. Okay. For my ADHD-year-old son, who's 20 years old, he's had no meds since he was diagnosed when he was 6 years old. Um, would there be any benefits to taking supplements available in healthy options? And I guess hindi na nilagay dito, but which supplements would you recommend? I guess. Thanks. Yeah.
For ADHD, for children, how old is the child
20.
now?
20.
20 na. Oh,
Uh,
I'm not sure. Certainly, turmeric has been shown to potentially increase BDNF. But if what we're talking about is ADHD per se, I'm not aware of supplements that actually increase, that help lessen ADHD symptoms. The number one quote unquote supplement a lot of ADHD people depend on is caffeine, which
mm,
increases both dopamine and norepinephrine, which is what is kind of low in the executive functioning areas of our brain.
mm.
Uh, so there's that. But like supplements, I'm not sure. I don't have any data on that.
Okay, okay. Sige. Let's just go with two last questions here. The first one is says here, thank you, Doc Banaag. Just now, the result of my test for anxiety is 8, and by the way, we have the same score which I don't consider myself to be anxious, but when I took that test earlier on, my score is 8. So she had the same thing. The question is, am I in borderline? Papaano pong treatment ang pwede kong gawin sa sarili ko about this? I was just a little worried that I fall in the borderline. I guess me too, no? I've never considered myself to be anxious or anything like that. I've always been happy. I am the combined hyperactive, energetic type. But when I took the thing, when I took the test, I realized that this pandemic has made me more anxious. No, so we both had the same
Well,
score. So what's your advice to that?
well, first, I'd like to point out in the 2 weeks leading to this lecture, my score was 14.
Wow. Okay.
I get terrifically anxious basta may lecture.
Yeah, and then
Uh,
it was messaged to you earlier on. There's so and so number of participants, and you're like, I did not need to know that. And I'm
yun
like,
nga eh. Thank
yeah,
you. Biglang tumaas yung anxiety level ko. But I
yeah.
am
That's
prone
what.
to
Yeah,
anxiety
it's like,
attacks. I do take meds.
yeah,
What I would suggest if you're in the borderline is check out yung 10 ways to boost brain function with BDNF. Take care of your
right.
sleep. Make
Mhm.
sure you're taking care of yourself. I can't tell you how many people I've told na just give it a try. Give it a try sleeping at 11, giving yourself 8 hours to sleep. And damning, they came back saying, actually, that's all I needed. Pala. I just needed to get good sleep.
Mm, right.
So really, cortisol levels go up as much as 37% just from the poor sleep. So
Mm,
unahin mo yun. If you're already doing that, then do the other things like to increase BDNF,
yeah.
exercise.
Uh, Actually, just along those lines, just a personal question from my end here, no? When you have a BDNF deficit, is that the same as brain fog? Like, for
Yun nga eh.
example, yeah,
Oo.
pareho
Kasi
yun,
nga,
more or less.
di ba yung connectivity nga lessons eh, nagiging
Right.
ganyan ang itsura. Pag bumababa yung
Oh,
BDNF, these are two brain cells. Instead of looking like this, pag bumababa ang BDNF, literally they start to look more like this or like this.
right.
I think most people experience that first as burnout symptoms. Yung brain fog, like, and
Mm,
for ADHD, it just feels like a worsening of what's already happening.
mm,
And more importantly, yung decreased stress tolerance. You feel more stressed over small things. So, maliit lang nangyari, pero parang umapaw yung stress levels mo, like you feel so stressed. And a lot of people, that can look like irritability. But it's really more like, why does this have to happen? Yung ganon. They just feel more stressed over small things. So when you're seeing things like that happening, that should be your warning sign that you need to take better care of your health.
I see. Okay. And this is our last question now. So I think this is asking about a coping mechanism for ADHD. It says here, good afternoon. Thank you for this discussion. If not yet diagnosed with ADHD, but experiences difficulty focusing and paying attention, are there exercises that we can do? I guess to like address focusing and paying attention. Yeah.
Like brain exercises. There are actually, yeah, yeah. There
Yeah.
are mental. I forget the name of the app. So this is what's nice about the age we live in now. There's an app for everything, but there are apps which help you focus better. And I would say that it did work for me. In college, I tried some mental health exercises, and I noticed that I could actually sustain my attention better. Now, some people say ADHD is overdiagnosed. Some people say it's underdiagnosed. I would say it's both.
Mm,
If you're an adult who's under terrific stress and you never had problems before, but now you're having cognitive problems, maybe you shouldn't be diagnosed with ADHD. Try to see first if there's something else going on, maybe burnout, maybe you're having depression or anxiety. Uh,
mm,
at the same time, it can be overdiagnosed. I think there's adults coming out there. There's people come up to me all the time. I think I have ADHD, and then when you talk to them, parang hindi naman. Actually, it's just there's too much on their plate. That's why they're forgetting stuff. So ADHD is a quantitative, not a qualitative illness or condition, meaning everybody has some ADHD symptoms sometimes. But if you truly have ADHD, that's your baseline. That's how you are
right.
on a Sunday morning when there's nothing
That's
going
right.
on. You don't have to remember anything. You're
Yeah.
walking into the room and you're like, I know I came in here for a reason. Or you open the refrigerator and you're like, was I hungry or thirsty? Why did I?
Yeah.
Yung ganon. That's the baseline. If it's just
Mm,
happening like recently, baka hindi ADHD yun. I
yeah.
also think ADHD can be underdiagnosed. There's a lot of adults, ADHD is it's there since you're a kid, so you grow up with it. So you don't identify the symptoms as being something weird. You kind of assume everyone is like this. You may have a vague notion or a vague feeling like, how come some people can do this much faster than me? How did he do that? How to be you po? Yung parang ganon. So they know there may be something different, but they're not likely to identify their symptoms as, oh, this is a problem, because they grew up like that. It's what they knew. So I think there's a lot of people also who have ADHD who are just not diagnosed.
That's right. That's right. That's pretty clear. Like that it has to sort of like appear as your baseline, right? That's how you normally are, as opposed to being caused by stress or just something that happened in the environment in the past so and so years, no? Parang ganun, no? And that's important, I guess, because the solutions will also
Yes,
differ,
the
no?
solution is
Parang ganun,
different.
no? Yeah. So ayun, no. So yeah, thank you for that. No, I would like to tell everybody who's watching to please keep messaging your questions. We'll try to answer them as much as we can. But for now, we would like to thank Dr. Carlo Banaag for being with us this afternoon. You know,
Thank you for having me.
yeah, we really appreciate this. This is such a relevant talk given this particular time. A lot of the data here the information you presented here is really practical for this current time. So we just want to once again, we want to once again thank all of our sponsors, the ADHD Society of the Philippines, National Council on Disability Affairs, the Department of Education, Miriam College's College of Education, Lenovo Philippines, Smart Communications, and Colony Design. So this is part 4 out of 5 of our webinar series celebrating ADHD month, the 17th year of the ADHD month. So we will have our part 5 tomorrow at 9 a.m. I hope you will still, everybody listening here would still join us. We will be with Dr. Merlene Alon. So for our talk tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. God bless you, and we'll see you soon. All right. Bye.
Can I go home?
Yeah.
Can I leave?